So welcome to the Insight Meditation community of Charlotte. I'm Ward Simmons. I'm the Dharma leader tonight. We have 5 Dharma leaders that rotate responsibility, and looks like we have 31 people tonight, which is probably a pretty good turnout for the night before Thanksgiving. So I'm glad that you could be here, and I'm glad that we could be here to be available so that we could be in community tonight. If we were in person, not on Zoom, we would speak to somebody near us. So if you're willing to put your picture up, if you don't have your picture displayed and you're willing to, maybe we can just look around and see who's with us tonight. It's not the same as being in person, but it sure is nice to be with y'all. So this evening, I want to explore the role of intention, and specifically in the context of this path to awakening that is insight meditation. And I want to start by just sharing a quote from Ajahn Amaro. He's a Theravadan monk, and this is from his book, Finding the Missing Piece. He says, "The main point of meditation is training the attention to focus on the present moment. The main point of meditation is training the attention to focus on the present moment." So one key word here is training. Before we embark on a spiritual path, we're usually so busy without much time for reflection or investigation or contemplation. And when we take up the practice of meditation, we undertake the training of our minds. So the untrained mind, like we all had before we started this practice, is like an untrained puppy. And the puppy jumps around from one stimulus to the next without any real plan. It just reacts. So a squirrel goes across the puppy's path and she is consumed with the squirrel. And then she walks past a chicken bone, and there's nothing in the world that is more important than that chicken bone. And then she meets another dog on the sidewalk, and the other dog is the only thing that exists for this puppy. So the untrained mind is likewise very poor at making choices based on anything other than what is presenting at the sense doors, that is, the eyes and the ears and the nose and the tongue and the skin. You know, I wasn't even hungry until I walked into the hardware store, and then I smelled that popcorn, and now all I can think about is the popcorn. I got to have some popcorn. And that's my puppy running wild. So when a stimulus presents itself, the untrained mind just naturally experiences desire or aversion. And when I say experiences desire or aversion, what I mean is that desire or aversion is triggered in the mind, but that is very different from saying that we recognize desire or aversion as occurring, because in the untrained mind, most experiences of desire or aversion are not recognized. So as we train the mind through meditation, we begin to develop the faculty of mindfulness. And mindfulness enables us to recognize what we're experiencing rather than just being lost in it. So the untrained mind's lack of awareness is what lack of awareness of what it's experiencing has a very predictable outcome, a very predictable consequence. So if you just think about it for a minute, if I don't know what I'm experiencing, then I'm not able to investigate. I'm not able to evaluate that experience and then choose an appropriate response. So instead, I simply react like the puppy and I chase after what's pleasant and I run away from what's unpleasant. And here is where the idea of intention comes in. If I'm simply reacting and not evaluating my experience, I can't compare any possible responses to my deepest intentions and choose one that aligns. So to restate that in an affirmative way, when I am mindful of my experience, when I respond rather than react unconsciously, then I have the opportunity to choose from among a range of possible actions. I can then choose a response that aligns with my values or my deepest intentions. So what we can see is that some of the benefits of training our minds in this way are that we can respond rather than react, that we have more options to choose from when we respond, and that we have the opportunity to choose a response that aligns with our values and our intentions. And the more we train ourselves in this way, the more it becomes easier to sustain this way of being in the world. So one thing that we need to keep in mind is, in this context, intentions are not the same as goals. So often those two terms are used interchangeably in our day-to-day lives. But for our purposes, intentions are quite different. And I got to tell you the truth that it took me longer than I like to admit to really understand the distinction. Now that I feel like I have an understanding of that, it kind of embarrasses me that it took me as long as it did, but it was hard for me to grasp. So goals are important and they're useful. So we might have the goal of achieving a promotion at work or saving money for a down payment for a home. If we remain focused on our goals and we apply ourselves, then we can progress toward those goals. But goals are not about how we conduct ourselves minute to minute. That's different. And this is where intention comes in. Intention guides us in each moment of experience. And I can't say this any better than Phillip Moffitt does, so I just want to share a couple of quotes from him, and they're not lengthy, so just stay with me for a couple of moments. He says, "Your goals are your preferences for the future. Your goals provide inspiration and direction, as well as determine how you allocate your time and resources. But your goals do not determine how you act right now. Instead, your intention determines how you actually think, act, and speak in any given moment." So this distinction between goals and intention is not so prevalent in our normal conversation, but it will be important as we progress on this path. So the other quote I'll offer is an analogy, which I think sheds light. He says, let's say that you and a friend decide to take a hike up a mountain. You see the mountaintop and you know that reaching it is your goal. It provides direction and inspiration for the hike. It even informs your preparation and resource allocation, the time you need to set aside, how much water and food you will take along, how you will dress, etc. Therefore, committing to the goal is a vital part of the hike. But the actual experience of hiking is very different than reaching your goal, the mountaintop. Your journey up the mountain consists of a series of single steps, rest stops, moments of seeing nature, and sharing companionship. The hike happens in the present moment in each individual step, and each step is primarily defined by your intention. If all you focus on is the goal, you can easily miss being present for the hike. So if you've been studying and practicing for any length of time, you know the term Dhamma, that's in Pali, or Dharma, that's in Sanskrit. And that is the body of teachings that were shared by the Buddha. And since the Dhamma is the foundation of insight meditation, what does the Dhamma have to say about intention? The first thing we can see is that intention is quite important in the Dhamma. So the Noble Eightfold Path, the path to awakening, includes intention as the second of the 8 path factors. And if you don't have the path committed to memory, I just want to take a moment and review this. Okay. So the wisdom factors are right view and right intention. And that's the topic of the talk tonight, right intention. The ethical behavior factors are speech, action, and livelihood. And the mind training factors are effort, mindfulness, and concentration. And the way this is commonly understood, we begin with a preliminary relationship with the wisdom factors. And that really propels us to enter the path. If we didn't have some measure of right view and right intention, we wouldn't have any interest in practicing. And as we then move on to the ethical behavior factors and cultivate improvements in our ethical behavior, a lot of our self-doubts and our regrets that are the source of much of our own unwholesome mental activity, those begin to diminish. Our ethical behavior improves and our worry and our regret decreases. As a result, we can move on to the mind training factors. And with less preoccupation, the mind can become more calm and more clear. And as we strengthen those factors, then that opens the way for a more sophisticated relationship with the wisdom factors. And we circle back to those and have more clarity about view and intention. And the insight that arises from the development of these wisdom factors is really the culmination of this path. So just a couple more points on this. You'll note that intention, along with view, the wisdom group here, intention is located between view and the ethical behavior factors. And this is important because our intentions arise from our views. if it's our view that we will be happiest if we get everything we can for ourselves and ignore the well-being of others, then you can imagine what intentions will arise from those views. And based on that view and those intentions, guess what happens next? Our behavior. Our behavior will be informed by our intention. So there's this progression from view to intention to behavior. Now I want to move on and look more closely just at the factor of intention, the path factor of intention. But before I do, I want to talk for a moment about view because it's so related to intention. So there are two key components to the idea of right view. And one is an understanding of the law of cause and effect, and one is an understanding of the truth of attachment. So starting with cause and effect, the Pali word there is kama. The Sanskrit word that we're more familiar with is karma. And this is simply a natural law that governs actions and the results of actions. Wholesome actions produce wholesome results, and unwholesome actions produce unwholesome results. Now, the Western perception on karma is somehow that it's kind of a reward or punishment system for good and bad behavior, but that's not really accurate. That's a misunderstanding. It's more like the law of gravity. So we know that if we hold an object up and we let go of it, it is going to fall to the ground. And there's no moral judgment involved. It's just what happens. It's the way things operate. And that's the way karma works. So the second of the two key components is the truth of attachment. And this is contained in the Four Noble Truths. So just to talk about those for a brief moment, dukkha or unsatisfactoriness or suffering is just an integral part of the human experience. Dukkha results from attachment. To the extent we can release our attachments, we will have less dukkha, and there is a path that can lead us toward less attachment, and that is the Noble Eightfold Path. So the short version is when we reduce our attachments, we reduce our dukkha or our unsatisfactoriness or our suffering. So moving on now to intention, let me put one other thing on the screen. Okay. There, I hope you can read that. So intention, so we know about the three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion. Right view dispels the poison of delusion, and intention dispels greed and hatred. And there are kind of three components to right intention that we want to know about. As it applies to ourself, it's the intention of renunciation. As it applies to others, it's the intentions of goodwill and harmlessness. Now, renunciation, we cultivate that intention because we recognize that it is the nature of desire that satisfying it will not result in the removal of the desire, but instead the strengthening of the desire. Goodwill, we cultivate that because we recognize that others want to be happy just like we do. And harmlessness, we cultivate that because we recognize others want to be free from suffering just like we do. So starting with renunciation, we can hear that as a negative term, as though we're somehow being denied something that we need for our well-being. But in fact, renunciation is exactly the opposite. It's supportive of happiness and well-being. And we can be forgiven for this misperception because our consumer culture that we live in constantly hammers home the idea that if we satisfy our desires, we'll be happy. And the more things that we can be convinced to consume, the more sales and profits are generated by those peddling this idea. But it's not true. It's like the emperor's clothes. It's just an apparent untruth that it's hard to see through because it's so pervasive. But on some level, we do know it's true that desire is satisfying our desires isn't going to bring us genuine happiness. One of the things we know is that every time we satisfy a desire, there's another one standing in line, waiting behind it, stepping right up, next up. And the mind has literally an unlimited supply of desires. We'll never run out. Every one that we satisfy, there will be another. So it's not possible to eliminate desire by satisfying them. And we've got to have an alternative. And that is when we look at the truth of attachment. And the truth is that attachment interferes with our well-being. Everything is constantly changing. Nothing will last forever. And the more attachments we have, the more losses we have waiting in the wings. The stronger the attachments, the more painful the losses will be. And when we renounce our attachments, we liberate ourselves from the bondage of this fear of loss. Now, just to be clear, 2 points. One, not being attached doesn't mean we don't care. We can care with attachment and we can care without attachment. And so don't conflate the two ideas. If you're not attached, you don't care, because that's nothing could be farther from the truth. The second thing is, if you practice renunciation, you don't have to give away all your possessions to free yourself of attachments. It's like a lot of things in these teachings. It's not our circumstances. It's our relationship to our circumstances. So if my uncle dies and leaves me a shiny new car, there's no reason I can't use it, and there's no reason I can't enjoy it. The question is, am I attached to it? Or is it just good, reliable transportation? For us as householders, as lay people, the goal in renunciation is not to renounce all possessions, but to renounce our attachment to the possessions. And when we make this distinction, then that can entirely change our understanding of renunciation, and it can make it a realistic option in our lives and in our practice. So renunciation addresses how we apply intention to ourselves, but what addresses how we apply intention to others? And the teaching here is twofold. First, the intention of goodwill, and second, the intention of harmlessness. And while they sound alike, they are different. The intention of goodwill opposes the intention of ill will and anger and aversion. And as I said, with this, we recognize others just want to be happy the same way we do. And the way we develop this is through the practice of metta, or loving kindness. The second intention directed toward others is the intention of harmlessness. And this opposes the intention of cruelty, aggression, or violence. And here we recognize others want to be free from suffering just as we do. So the intention of goodwill is wishing positive things for others. The intention of harmlessness is wishing freedom from the negative. And in this case, we cultivate karuna, which is the Pali word for compassion, and that supports the intention of harmlessness. So that's a little bit about intention and how intention fits into the path, insight meditation, and the Noble Eightfold Path. I hope that's useful, and we do have a little time. And so if anyone has any questions, you can either, if you know how to use the raise your hand function within Zoom, feel free to use that. If not, you can feel free to chat in your question using the chat function. And we'll see how that goes. While I'm waiting to see if anybody's gonna pose a question or a comment, I will make one other statement, which is, for me, I think it is so easy to forget to check in with intention. And for me, a big clue is if I'm wrestling with something, if I'm angry about something, I'm telling myself a story. How could they say that to me? Why did they do this? That's not right. Kind of indignant. And I'm trying to figure out how to respond to all this story in my head. And that's always a good clue. And if I can just stop and say, these responses I'm contemplating, what is the underlying intention? I'm usually pretty shocked and embarrassed. And it gives me a chance to step back and approach it from a different point of view. Okay, so it looks like Susan has a question. Susan, see if that allows you to unmute.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Walt. I really enjoyed your talk and your topic, intention. I think it's a good time of year because usually about now I'm starting to think about an intention of a word or a phrase for the next year. So your distinction between goals and intentions was good on that. And I also really liked your metaphor about the puppy because and here's mine right here. Sadie I've always felt like she's such a role model for me about present moment centeredness because, you know, she is always ready for whatever, as you said, the sense doors are presenting. So you help make that distinction that although she seems evolved in one way, she's actually not aware of her experience and the importance of that on what we actually end up doing. And I also understand the renunciation when you were talking about how you can never acquire enough to actually satisfy the desire for more things. I was thinking about a t-shirt that people used to wear in the 1980s that said, "The one who dies with the most toys wins." You remember that? And I thought, you're right, because she said, we really know it's not true, because even that t-shirt was a joke, it was to make people laugh. We know that it's true. No matter how many toys you get, you're not going to win when you're dead, because you don't take it with you. So I wanted to comment. I also like the way in your talk you pull in the big picture of the Eightfold Path and then back into the Four Noble Truths, and help to tie in your topic to the larger teachings. So thanks for a great talk.
Well, thanks, Susan. Thanks for your remarks, for your comments. Now, okay, anyone else? I see a chat. Comments, thank you. No real questions. Everything must be perfectly clear. We can all leave tonight with a complete understanding of intention. Okay, well, I will move on to announcements. So we do have a few announcements. First of all, every week at 7 o'clock, there is an instruction period. It's a different Zoom session, 7 to about 7:20. If you're new or relatively new, or even if you're not new, and you would like a little refresher, please join us. One of our Dharma leaders sets aside an extra half hour every week to be available. And so if it would be useful to you, please take advantage of it. You probably know that the Sangha sent out its annual survey via email. So I don't know when the deadline is. I'm sure the email tells us, but it just came out, so it's not over yet. So if you would take a few minutes and provide your feedback, this is once a year, a chance for the board and the Dharma leaders to hear from you and try to plan the next year based on what would meet your needs. This is kind of a holiday announcement. We do meet every Wednesday, no matter what the calendar shows. So we will meet on Wednesday, the 23rd of December, 2 days before Christmas. And we will meet on Wednesday, December 30th, the day before New Year's Eve. On January 9th, Joy will be leading a day-long retreat. The topic is Begin Again, New Year and New Insights. So that and everything I'm mentioning is visible on the website. On January 13, we will have a guest leader. It is Aya Sudama, local Theravadan monk here in Charlotte. And she comes and speaks to us, graces us with her presence about once a year. So I know that'll be worth making a special effort to be present for. Thanks to the volunteers that make this all possible. It's a little different from the way it used to be. We used to have coordinators. The coordinators are still out there waiting for our in-person meetings, but right now the workload has shifted to the people that handle the recordings and get them on the website and those kinds of things. So thanks to everybody that makes this possible in our community. Finally, if we were in person, I would tell you there's a box in the back of the room for dana or generosity, but we're not in person. And so I'll tell you that if you want to support this community financially, you can go to the website imccharlotte.org and make a donation there. Why don't we close with our metta or loving kindness practice. So just finding a comfortable posture. And before we begin, we'll just take a moment and you can bring to mind anyone, any being or beings that you would like to have held in loving kindness tonight. And I will add to those beings all the beings that are suffering great disappointment because things didn't go the way they wanted them to with the clarification of the election results in the last week. When we practice metta or loving kindness, there's no room to leave out anyone. So I'll offer a few phrases that you can repeat silently to yourself, and we'll begin with ourselves. May I be safe from inner and outer harm. May I be happy and content. May I be healthy in body and mind. And may I live a life of well-being, free from suffering. And then turning our attention to some other being or beings, whatever feels to you like you'd like to direct loving kindness toward, whatever beings you'd like to direct loving kindness toward. Maybe calling to mind an image. May you be safe from inner and outer harm. May you be happy and content. May you be healthy in body and mind. And may you live a life of well-being, free from suffering. And finally, broadening our loving kindness, our metta practice out to incorporate all beings everywhere. May all beings be safe from inner and outer harm. May all beings be happy and content. May all beings be healthy in body and mind. And may all beings, without exception, live lives of well-being, free from suffering. Have a happy Thanksgiving and next week, and we'll see you next Wednesday.